Hello, hello. How's it going, everybody? Gotta turn my music down just a smidge. We're coming into the holidays. It I feel like it plays around with the schedule a little bit here, but not much we can do about it. I am looking to stream, I guess, the next 2 weeks. Today we are going to look at sort of the landscape of local first. We have in the recent past, a couple streams ago, and for probably about a month, we were looking at local first options and specifically like how they played with and had interesting integrations that we could work with in Tauri. Most of the landscape is built with the expectation that you are running this in a browser and you don't have like a local server or a local thing running alongside it, which you kind of have with a Tauri app. So I think there's some interesting setups and integrations that you could do specifically with Tauri. But the library kind of needs to support it. So we played around with YJS. I think that had an interesting setup that we could build on top of, partly because it had the beginnings of a server written in Rust. I don't know that there's really any other libraries out there, but we're gonna go peruse, as it were, and talk about like what the landscape is right now and how it feels like we've been kind of going through a phase of evolution in the past like 6 months or so, maybe a little bit longer, and we'll put pins in anything that seems interesting, just in general, but also like this might be a cool integration that we can do with the Tauri app. And then I guess I'm not quite sure what we'll do next week. It's going to depend on if we find anything interesting that I'm really, really itching to jump into this week. And then the following week, I want to do the Tauri V2 Android stream. We did iOS last week, and so part of this is I'm lining it up with downtime at work, and it went pretty well. I feel like we hit it on all the pieces that I was interested on hitting on, including getting into plugins and debugging. So we're going to try to do the same in Android. And then we'll sort of like come back around, and in the new year we'll sort of start to meld all this stuff together. And there's an overarching theme that I've it's been sitting in the back of my mind that we're learning together about. So we'll go ahead and hop on over to the display. I just realized. So I've been playing around with and modifying my setup here. I did a whole bunch of changes like 2 week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago, which it worked well. I liked it. But let's try this one. I didn't really use it because we were actually on my Mac. So now we're we've swapped it back over here. So we'll have to play around with and make sure that what I see is going to be something that y'all can also be able to read. Zoom levels and layouts and stuff. It has all changed a little bit for me, but we'll work through it. Okay, so this, I guess we don't really need any of this. This is sort of what we were getting into a couple weeks ago. You can see some tinkering around with Specta as well as commands. But let's go ahead and close all this. We're going to start out with so completely unrelated, but this library, if you're all are interested in the handful of things that we've done on the stream that they didn't specifically fit in the project or go in a better place, they just end up landing here. So you can see sort of these are effectively all of our experiments. Like very purely, this is a experiment. But it looks like I actually did not push up the commands stuff. I need to get on that. We will fix that, but not right now. There is, we're going to start off with, if I can remember it actually, what is local first? No, local, oh my goodness. I'm completely blanking on it now. Nope, I didn't put anything in the README here. This is more related. This is a little bit more of the playground for local first stuff. Actually, I could probably rename it playground. I've got a we sort of have a pattern going on. All right, I'm not signed in. We can go over to my list of repositories here. Local first, and we did this personal tray app on stream. Redacted was a project we did on stream. Where's my play? Here we go. Tauri playground, and then there's there should be another playground too, I think. Oh, just Rust playground. So I've got the 2 playgrounds that we've been. Oh, I guess 3 actions playground too. Okay. Anyways, let us go to, I think it's local. Here we go. This is what I was thinking about. This is a community I've been sort of lurking in for a while, but I haven't participated, partly because most of their like meetup type things that they do happen to be like now. So it's kind of unfortunate, but it is what it is, I guess, right? But they've got these list of projects, I guess, sort of categorized as well, storing data and syncing data. List a bunch of folks that are sort of like in the, I guess I wouldn't say in the industry, but like leading the charge as far as like development goes. In the most, or for the most part, it's like development. Like I think Johannes is, I guess Johannes is working with Liveblocks, right? I think. Definitely, if you are new to this space, the sync and switch article, I feel like really cemented the feel and like the thing that I was trying to reach for, and gave it structure in like a term. And that I feel like is really what kicked off the like the ideological version of local first. I think folks were, myself included, sort of striving to do something like this, but it just didn't really have a like it didn't have terminology that sort of helped to market and give it structure. Okay. I'm looking through the list to see if there's anything actually new on this list that I haven't pulled up before. There's a couple that I think have been on here a while, but I don't actually remember. I think some of these have been on there for some time. Socket Hub. The ones that we've looked at on stream specifically are, we did Tinybase a while ago now. It is a little bit more of a meta framework. And yeah, you can see like electric SQL. Terso is a SQLite lib. PowerSync, PartyKit, YJS, and PartyKit are there's a lot of overlap there. Sierra SQLite is a SQLite like syncing mechanism. AutoMerge, we did that on stream a couple of weeks ago. As well as YJS, we did I think YJS has probably been my favorite so far. Partly because the ecosystem has for YJS specifically has come further than the other one options, I believe. From what I've seen, like it feels like the ecosystem has evolved a little bit more, and it had that Rust server, which made for a really interesting integration. But you'll see a lot of like SQLite here. Oh, and PGLite. I'm gonna open up. I guess that goes directly to their docs, doesn't it? Okay, we can just go directly to the site. I do want to look at this, which is partly why I'm opening it, but well, that's not it. PG Lite .dev. Okay, we'll come back to that. So we've done Tinybase. We did. I think we looked at a couple of these on stream specifically, but we didn't actually dive into them. YJS and AutoMerge. So YJS and AutoMerge are probably the other big ones that we've gone through on stream, like a full dedicated stream to it. But some of these others I've looked at more offline, but we haven't actually like done anything on stream on it. And there's a few of these that are, I don't know if I would qualify it as sunset, but seeing less activity. So the folks that are working on Replicache, they don't actually have anything else on here. Okay, so if we go over to Replicache is a very interesting one, in part because it comes with the backend stuff, and it ends up handling a lot of this stuff for you. Bunch of marketing stuff, and we'll kind of get into why that is nice. It's in some ways both a pro and a con. What I'm personally interested with local first is the like data ownership, privacy, the like offline first sort of mentality. The downside is it makes sort of the multiplayer data synchronization part a little bit more involved, because you need to effectively do peer-to-peer. So you need some level of like, there's this instance of the thing and it needs to sync with another instance of a thing. That could potentially be like my phone and my computer, but that could also potentially be a server. So like it gives you a lot more flexibility, but it ends up being more complex because you have you're losing potentially that central authority when you push in that direction. Replicache is a little bit more, we have a central authority and then we sync to all the clients. So it's seems rather well polished, and it works with like the sync mechanism. I think is it SQLite, if I recall. I don't actually see anything that says what it's or is it IndexedDB? It's either SQLite or IndexedDB. I don't remember offhand. Either way, it's sort of irrelevant. The idea is that it's in local first in the fact that it is handling and working with the data locally first, and then doing sort of like a background sync to a central authority. So the central authority is nice in that it's a little bit easier to write an app in which you can have multiple users working off the same data set. And like the permission structure is a little bit more straightforward. The downside is that you basically have to have some level of like online availability. Oh, one second. Okay, so Replicache is interesting. I haven't personally tried it. I've seen a whole bunch of folks talking about it. And they have a couple demos. Like, I think I've clicked the demos, but honestly, like all the local first demos are the same. It's you click a button. I mean, the demo is either multiplayer or it's just if you notice it happening, then it's bad. It's one of these things that like it's a very interesting architecture, but it needs to stay out of the way. And the only thing that you should notice is that it seems to work really well and run really fast. But that isn't like library specific. It's just if it's implemented well, you won't notice it. And then the other thing that so Replicache is I don't remember what license, but Replicache is open source. They do have a hosted solution though, which is Reflect. They don't have anything else on here. Oh, here we go. This is what I was looking for. So they have, and this is one of the things that have shifted. I feel like in my mind, Replicache was at the sort of the forefront or the lead of pushing down this path of local first and enabling infrastructure to support that wholesale. So they had sort of these like, I wouldn't call them competing products, but there's Replicache and then there's Reflect. Reflect was doing a little bit more, but it also had, you had to use their infrastructure. And then the front end implementation, you sort of like had to use their pieces too, is the feeling that I was getting. But they have, they're basically like sunsetting Reflect and shifting to this new thing they call Zero. Still the same vein, still the same like end goal, I guess I would say. But let's see if they mention it in here. Like functionally, I don't. The API is going to be a little bit different. But I think the big thing is that they are trying to push for more general. What do they say it? General purpose sync engine. But then also like doing things like the partial synchronization and like handling more of it for you, but it means that they need more control of both sides of the coin, the infrastructure and like the local state. So it looks like they've got these, what I'm imagining are like React hooks. And do they say anything else? They have started doing demos. I've seen a few folks get like previews and do videos on it. But you're very much like, this is a view in a component. You don't have too much control over it. So depending on like what you're doing, I do suspect this will be a good solution for many apps that would be interested in pursuing local first, because it's doing some of this heavy lift with the expectation that like you're working with potentially large data sets, and that it is a little bit like your front end and the application is a little bit more of a fancy version of a database GUI. I think for that use case, this is going to be perfectly fine. So 0 is interesting. It works with, is it big enough? I feel like I keep having to like zoom everything in here. The, what was I saying? The replication happens through Postgres. So it's like built on top of, I guess they say MySQL too here. I think replicache was only one of them. I don't remember. But in either way, like you can see here, they are specifically calling it out that 0 client. You're kind of writing like a JavaScript TypeScriptified SQL and working with the client. So you don't have very direct control over this type of or this like piece of code here. And then it does WebSocket stuff to the, which I'm guessing this is the server layer. They don't really call that out. And I think sort of the 0 client too is effectively like an embedded DB. So like there's reasons to do this, because they're handling both the state like loaded into the app, but then also that sync mechanism through that like local embedded DB, which I don't know that they call out in here what it is. I feel like it was, I can't remember if they were saying it was SQLite or something in that vein, but either way, like there's a reason for it, and I think this is going to be a very interesting library plus infrastructure for like a subset of apps. Functionally, if we think about how we might want to include it within like within a Tauri app, or just if you're deciding if you want to use it for the infrastructure for an app, I think it's going to end up coming down to, if you're okay with it just basically driving your views and it's more of a database GUI layer, I think it can work well. But like functionally, there's not going to be any difference implementing this in Tauri, in a Tauri app versus whatever app versus, you know, a like a website. I think it's going to end up like that integration is going to end up looking the same. So, you know, that can potentially be both a pro and a con depending on what you're looking for. Hey Darth, good to see you. Yes, love me some like I'm so glad that this is starting to come along, because I've wanted to do this sort of thing and work with this type of infrastructure for my I think when I first really started getting into web dev and basically writing code for some sort of like web development app was, I don't know, like 12, 13 years ago or something like that. And I was just using JSON. Basically, so I was expecting folks to like open up a JSON file, because that was kind of, I know I wanted to sort of do this thing, but that was really the only way to do it. And I mean, part of it is I didn't want to make the infrastructure to do it better, because then I want to end up spending all my time working on the infrastructure. I kind of just wanted to use it. So I'm glad it's getting to the point where I can kind of use it. And like this whole idea of CRDTs has been, I'm glad that's evolving. Okay, so 0 is probably one of the big ones that feel interesting. I don't know if it's going to have a specific like neat use case that only shows up in Tauri apps or is like really useful in the context of a Tauri app. But it's something I will at least personally continue to keep an eye on. And related to, here, let's make this a little bit bigger. I think that's, I'm gonna have to like, can I set a default zoom or something here? I don't know that I can, at least not without digging into it further. Okay, so the other bit of this is I was particularly interested in Vulkan as well and Cirrus SQLite because that does feel like it has potentially an interesting integration. There's a few other like kind of incubating type things that they've been looking at. And some of this is like, as they want to make it more generic, they end up having to control more of the like view and handling it. Yeah, I could hold control in Zoom. Yeah, that works fine too. I just wanted it on every page so I don't have to keep remembering to do it because like I can see it fine, but I don't know that y'all can read it well unless I zoom in. Okay. So the incubating projects are fine, sure. And you can see a little bit of a pattern in what they're doing. Vulkan Web was like this. There's a sort of a lot of familiarity here with these other like libs, where you're doing it, like it's writing some sort of hook. They all seem to be very React specific hooks, and then you're writing your like SQL directly in the hook. It's either going to be like a string or it's going to be a like a TypeScriptified client type thing, like what we were just looking at with Zero. The thing I was interested in was CR SQLite. And you can see a couple of the sponsors here. You know, there's interest in this. So there's looks like there's been folks basically like sponsoring or helping to make this work happen. The CR SQLite was one of the more interesting ones because, can we go to Rust? It was interesting specifically to me because I was looking to potentially do, is this Rust usage? This looks like, I actually can't tell what SQLite, this looks like SQLite actually. Packages. I was hoping for some example that would be easy to look at. Okay, well, none of these are going to be particularly convenient. I was hoping because it was written in Rust that we could handle some of the sync on the Rust side of things within like a Tauri app. And then the front end sort of just like gets the data and works with it through like a SQLite database that's embedded in the app. The downside of that is there's actually a few things, like an alchemy for Rust. I'm presuming you're talking about like SQL alchemy, the Python lib, right? That is a little bit more like ORM helpers, ORM as in like a helper to handle migrations of the database and kind of give you a client to work with it. This is when you're working with sync engines, it does a little bit more of that, like interacting with the database for you, because you have these like more of a decentralized setup to where rather than like sending a query or doing a thing and having one central authority handle it, you do it locally, and then there's the sync mechanism that makes sure that the state that you have here also matches the state that's over here and over here. So yes, in some ways, but also no in other ways. You do still need, especially if you're using SQLite locally, you do still need to do the migrations, and that starts to become complex. Because now you're doing like every deploy, you have a potentially a central authority that needs to do database migration, and then every client needs to follow suit. And who knows when they last logged in. So it feels like an interesting architecture, but I think they were starting to run into those type of issues. And without having more control over that, the DX of that was very difficult. So like functionally, it feels like this could have been cool within a Tauri project, but then like I hope that's the only thing you're shipping, because this doesn't feel like something that would like what you would write in, like work with it in Rust. You'd end up having to rewrite it if you also want to ship a web app version of it. So none of it felt like a great time. And that you can kind of see that there's not been too much progress, in part because I don't know if they actually say it anywhere, but I wouldn't call this project dead. But Matt is now working with Rassi Corp, partner at Rassi Corp. So Matt joined the folks at Rassi Corp to work on Zero, and that's why you can there is some overlap between these ideas, and I think that's part of the reason that they like teamed up to work on this, because you could kind of see that there was very similar. The path forward that they saw was similar, so it made sense for their paths to cross. Now that they're focusing on Zero, I wouldn't call CR SQLite dead, but also like it does kind of feel like they had a feeling of not necessarily like completeness, but they took it as far as they could, and to improve the DX and improve the ability to ship with it, fundamentally they felt something had to change, which is in some ways like the end of the road for this lib. So like two of the big ones that I was very interested in have teamed up and now are working at Zero, which is cool. I'm glad for them. But it also means that in some ways it doesn't make sense to dig into that any further until they push Zero along a little bit further down the path. So that leaves us with a few of the other ones that we've looked at. There are, you might notice a little bit of overlap, like this Hocus Pocus also has a YJS logo. Y Suite, YJS, JamSocket team, JamSocket. These are all like, this is kind of what we were talking about with YJS. It feels like the ecosystem around that has evolved further than in the other setups. So there's a lot of overlap there. And like functionally, we look at YJS, we kind of get an idea what these other ones look like. So that ends up leaving like the power sync. I think like I've had folks mention that we should check out I'm not quite sure how to say that honestly, Logx and Laurel. Liveblocks is also sort of built on top of YJS, but it's a little bit different. And then we have a couple of these other ones that I don't know that they've like newly popped up,
but we're gonna pop a bunch of them open. Actually, before Electric SQL is, I think, one of the other ones that has felt interesting. And honestly, as a bit of an aside, storing data and syncing data, you can see that there's a lot of crossover because to have a nice DX, it feels like libs are basically defaulting to controlling both sides of it. And I see the reasoning for it. But it also means that they need to write a React hook, and that's the only thing you can use if you're in React. Because all of that nice DX comes from them controlling both sides of it very closely. So if you're writing a Vue app, you know, but we'll sort of like take a peek at the storing data side of things, because I think the syncing side of it is a little bit more interesting, at least for the Tauri use case. But there is, we're gonna pop open, I think it's these two, Electric SQL. They're the folks that spun up PG Lite. So this is, let's see, we gotta dig through the marketing a little bit. You can see again, we work with React. We have a React hook. The thing that kind of pains me about this is that I feel like a lot of these setups are controlling the hook, and all their DX wins come from that. But then you lose that flexibility, and as soon as you try to like not use their hook, then all those nice DX goodies you've lost as well. I don't know. It's just feels like an unfortunate trade-off, because I don't necessarily want to use their hook, because it ends up hooking you. No pun intended. I feel like it ends up hooking you into the fact that you're kind of just a fancy layer over the database. So like functionally I can see why they're doing it, but that loss of flexibility is unfortunate. The other thing though that they did come out with was this PG Lite, and it is a WASM build of Postgres. So there's been a bunch of work in the area of SQLite and in Postgres, effectively like competing against SQLite. So there's now a couple SQLite libs, some of which have been like forked and built upon. And honestly, like SQLite used to be the, I'm just gonna chuck something in there because I need some sort of like data store for trying things out locally. It's honestly come along to the point where you can effectively use it in production without getting fired for it. Like it's not done as a jinky fallback. It's done, or it's something that can be used with intent now. And I think a lot of the local first use cases are built on or use SQLite because the data that you're handling when you're doing local first is sort of naturally smaller anyways. So like Cloudflare has their durable objects, and that like the idea of that is sort of like each one of these things is its own database. So rather than having a central authority for the database, what does it look like if we have lots and lots of small databases? You can still throw a lot of data in these. Like SQLite, you can have tens of hundreds of thousands of records, and it's still like it starts to get big to where I think the thing that you would run into before performance of the database and accessing itself is the size. So if you're shipping around this big chunk, like this big database chunk, it can be a lot depending on what you're doing with it. So the electric SQL is built over the top of, like, electric SQL, as far as I understand, is more of a sync mechanism. So let's see, do they say anything here? You're effectively running like a layer. This is very, very quick start, high level. Yeah, so it gives you an API, and so it's not necessarily controlling, or here we can see a bunch of like integrations. Actually, I'm curious what the 10 stack one looks like. Okay, this is a decent graph. You still have a Postgres database somewhere, so you're still central authority. You still have to maintain that infrastructure, and you have your normal API. But then you also have an electric SQL API, effectively, and that electric SQL API is the thing that connects with the client and does all that work to then eventually get you into the same state as the central authority. So like it functionally, again, it's going to be useful for like a subset of apps, but I don't know that it's just another, if part of local first is avoiding or relying on infrastructure, because offline first is a core tenet of what you're doing, this is just more infrastructure. Like in some ways, I kind of think of it like a GraphQL layer. It gives you a different way to query and grab data. And what's interesting is, like, you could pull this in for a generic app and have Electric SQL do some of this stuff, and your original like API that you wrote for it handle other parts. So this feels like something you can actually put in place in a like a more of a default setup, I would say. Sort of in the same vein of, like, you can chuck in a GraphQL layer somewhere, and then it just is another option for folks to build off of. So, like, from that point of view, I think it's interesting. I don't see anything that, if we're doing more of a bootstrap, local first, you own the data type app, I don't think it's bringing anything really new to the table for us. But like in general, the PG Lite though does seem pretty interesting, because there are still differences between Postgres and between SQLite. So if you're thinking about the sync mechanism and you're storing data locally in like a SQLite database or some subset of that, you then have to do or consider the fact that whatever you end up syncing to, like a Postgres instance in the cloud somewhere, you need to think about those like differences between databases. And then also with PGLite, it has what do they call them? Extensions, I guess. And those extensions end up, okay, so like there's this reactive, which I'm guessing is a little bit more like events. And then you can toss in like vector, a vector extension as well. And vectors are interesting. You see them a lot with like all this LLM type work, because so much of it is, we need data and we need to access the data in a graph like fashion. that doesn't mean that that's the only thing it's useful for. So like vectors and the idea of like what's the uh, like a search or a piece of data, what's the thing that's most closely related to it? Like in general, that's useful in many applications. Um, in any type of like search or data viewing, it's nice to be able to have that that ability to tie pieces of data together. Um, yeah, so a bunch of extensions, which is probably one of the bigger things that it has going for it over SQLite. So we'll keep that in mind, but it does anytime you're using SQLite or PGLite, um, if it's more of a default database, you end up having to be more specific about handling the migrations. So either you have a lib or a sync engine doing that for you, or you're doing it. If you're using something like YGS, that is a little bit more of a in memory, we're storing a string somewhere and serializing it type of setup. So the client portion of it is a little bit more straightforward. But again, there's trade-offs. That is going to work fine for multiplayer. Large data sets, though, it starts to make sense to do that. Large data sets locally in something more intended to store that. Okay, so that sort of brings us back to, so we have like replicache and electric SQL are both, I guess replicache and now zero and electric SQL are sort of, there's a lot of similarities, and it's controlling more of the front end and requiring infrastructure and a central authority for the back end. So that's going to be beneficial for like that subset of like a subset of apps that are like the type of app that is a GUI over the top of a database. Um, which, I mean, to be clear, GUI over the top of a database describes a lot of apps. um, and honestly, I joke quite often, if you're making a SaaS and in any way is sort of doing that type of functionality, you're likely competing with Excel. Excel is effectively like a GUI over the top of a database, but those layers are very, very much like on top of each other. Like it's incredibly flexible. Excel is. So, you know, you might be competing with Excel if you're doing that type of thing. So don't get me wrong. There's lots of applications that would benefit from this, and benefit from you know, that ability to work with the data locally. But like the things that I'm interested in as far as like bootstrap type projects and how it can work within Tauri, like it's cool. We're gonna keep an eye on it, but it's probably not something that I'm going to continue to come back to on as like a stream topic. Because in some ways that's kind of just a fancy database. So there are other options. That's kind of how Bookmap is made. It's a here. Let's I think I updated this. We'll see if it works. Yeah, that looks pretty good. I did a little work to we switched out the UI kit for that. There's still a little bit of work that I want to do with it, but it functions. Speaking of functions, I want to. Why is this light so bright? Left. There we go. It was doing a little bit of fuzzy, and that was bothering me, but fixed now. Okay. Bookmap. It's a real fancy Excel spreadsheet that shows order volume. Okay. I haven't actually heard of Bookmap. Futures trading. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, like I said, there's a lot of very fancy Excel spreadsheets. You know, there's a lot of fancy Excel spreadsheets, and there's a lot of fancy SASs that are effectively Excel spreadsheets. Because honestly, you can do like API calls and stuff through Excel at this point, or even like Google Sheets. So like, it does require a certain type of folk to get into it, but it could be just as powerful, if not more powerful, to do the thing in Excel. I've written finite element analysis, like structural analysis, in Excel. to give some context. You can do some wild stuff with it. Okay, so now the other options that we've at least peeked at in many of these on stream. I don't think we've dug into any things too much more though. Let's. I don't know that there's a great order to poke at these though. All right, so we'll look at Liveblocks. I imagine a bunch of these are going to be. You look at enough of these, and they all end up looking very similar. You have a hook. This is kind of a database view, and you're mapping over it. In some ways, though, like, I mean, I gotta say this demo is pretty nifty, but like the idea of multiplayer has been around long enough that it's not something that you can. It's not a standout feature anymore. And like the whole text editing thing, kind of in the same ways. So like, there's going to be a subset of these local first that are specifically built for text editors, because that's a very hard problem, to be clear. So they put a lot of effort into it. But if you're not building a text editor, the benefiting from that effort is not as much of a feature as the other like tenets of what you would want to get out of local first. So, I mean, they've got a YJS integration. We've looked at YJS, and then the storage I think is more just a like sync engine. I think this is more about just integrating directly with you got a room and an event listener, and it does stuff. Like, this looks very much like YJS. Seeing this, I do suspect, I don't know how much it is dependent on YJS. They do have that integration. So there's this. I don't think it's reliant on that though. So I think the storage is more of a it enables it, but you can fall back to basically using non-YJS. At this point though, that like this presence thing is nifty, but the data syncing I think is the hard part. And if you want the data syncing, you would end up using YJS in this case. So like here we have a create store. So create stores Redux. So that uses, I think that would end up being built on top of Emmer. Enhancer comes from Liveblocks Redux. So I'm guessing this enhancer is effectively like the sync mechanism, and it's syncing it into a local like in-memory store. So I guess put that down as like it looks like it's doing the same thing with sustand. Is that how you say it? I honestly have not. I don't know that I've actually said this out loud. Zustand. I've read it a bunch, but I don't know that I've actually said it out loud. And you'll see like presence mapping. You'll see that a lot because it demos really, really well. But I don't feel like many apps need that. If you're doing text or some sort of like mind mapping drawing type thing, it's neat. It's nice. Otherwise, I don't know. If you're not doing that, then like big deal. So I'm guessing that enhancer is working with and handling that sync mechanism, which is honestly kind of cool. And they do have like if you don't need the text editor, then like cool. But also sync engines to build real-time products. If you want to do some sort of like sync type thing, which as I understand it is like that enhancer, that type of thing, it adds up kind of fast. I mean, 6 monthly active users, right? Yeah, monthly active users. So they say 11 cents for each over the top of that. If it's a paid product, that's not the end of the world. And the nice thing is it's basically handling your backend. So it is the backend service. It's the like your database effectively. I don't know though. So they do, I guess, specifically say C conflict free data store. I was gonna say CRDT, but they don't have the um like this isn't spelled out to match the words acronym. There we go. And they have integrations. So I mean, I guess if you're really just interested in like you don't care about the comments, um, I don't really know what the difference is between these. But I'm guessing the real-time APIs is something that you need, and it says sync engines here. So I'm guessing it would be at least like that. So you can probably get away with if you're bootstrapping an app with the free for a while, but you will eventually have to pay. So have a way to immediately start onboarding folks to pay you for it because Pro is definitely outside of the like bootstrapper. I'm just gonna pay out of pocket until I get more folks type of thing. Oh, that's neat. So that does change. Got it. Depending on how many things you enable, it can be up to like almost 30 cents a user. And I'm presuming that's in US dollars. So kind of a neat integration, but also you're dependent on their like again, this fits into the you know, electric SQL and Liveblocks. There's some overlap there as far as the audience that they're serving. All right, next on the list, the power sync. The power sync is, I think, specifically SQLite sync, and so they say your backend and another service. So power sync, I think, is more of the again in the same vein of like what electric SQL is doing. I've definitely looked at this less though, so let's give it a scroll before I make generalizations. It's kind of cool that they have some Like it looks like they have clients in other languages, Dart with SQL, React with SQL. But like you're writing your SQL, so you're very much going to be like, again, I feel like this comes back to your, and if you're in the React ecosystem at all, there's this whole like push to do rendering on the server and React server components and all that stuff. I feel like all of that is now you're very dependent on a specific set of infrastructure and that it supports it, which is nice if you want to pay for it and have it handle that. It doesn't work the best for all of these. I keep seeing the tenets of local first. Let's drop this in the chat. I feel like they've in this article laid out the high level tenets well. Here, this is a good example. And they have the short version of it here. These are the like 7 tenets that they've qualified. Offline is the hard one. So like if you enable like peer-to-peer sync, you end up doing a lot of the work to get you to enabling collaboration multi-device. And all the ones that we've looked at so far have some of that. And it can potentially bring along fast and maybe user control, but you're reliant on that third-party service, which means 3, 5, and 6 end up being very difficult to do. So that's part of what I'm specifically interested in. The fact that we have Rust and we potentially have some flexibility there if we're doing it within a Tauri app. What does it look like if you are the infrastructure? I think that's one of the better ways to more directly affect 3, 5, and 6. If you want this to last forever, if you give somebody a download of an app and they have some sync mechanism that isn't reliant on infrastructure that you're hosting, it's like there's minimal cost to the developer to I mean, other than like obviously time is going to come into this, but like there's no infrastructure cost, or there can be very low infrastructure cost for that sort of setup, which is interesting because if it suddenly just goes away, it would probably still work offline and theoretically forever. I mean, there's going to be some sort of like eventually pieces stop working, especially if it's very much built on top of like OS APIs. But those bits are, I think, the most interesting to me, just because there's lots of these kind of options, which I love. Don't get me wrong. But having something that checks all of those boxes is still a little bit difficult to do. So they've got, supports these frameworks. So it looks like they've got a bunch of clients. And what they're doing is, in the vein of these other services, they're like, all of these are either the infrastructure or a layer in front of your infrastructure. So like beneficial, but it's going to be for a certain type of app. And this SDK is what they're discussing down here. So connects to these backends, MongoDB, MySQL, and Postgres. That's then syncing through the service into and their client SDK into a SQLite database locally. So there is potentially some like offline data ownership type thing there, but you're still reliant on now like 2 layers of infrastructure. So if you're trying to potentially limit that, PowerSync does not seem the way to go. And you're reliant on like their like the other thing with this is if it's controlling all of the client and like the state directly within the app, I feel like it ends up it's database folks working on enabling like front end views. In the like one of the big pushes with GraphQL is it sort of like was unlocking that where it gave more control to the front end user over the type of and structure of the data. And I think there's benefits in that. So like functionally this isn't too much different than a bunch of REST APIs and you making calls and then caching the data. Because any sort of like manipulation or whatever you want to do on top of that, you're still doing on the client. And every time that data changes. So it seems like this is where we're at with it. But like to make that DX nice, folks are making SDKs, which I'm not. I can appreciate the reasoning, but I'm not terribly well sold on that. Is there any other ones? I think those are, let's see. If you look back here, again, this overlap is likely going to come with if there's a storing data piece. Like if we're looking at syncing data, if we have a match in storing data, it's likely going to be a service. You want to build a bookmap, store the data locally so that you can then try to sort it all, some sort of AI on it. You were looking at timescale. I don't think I've have I heard of timescale? I don't know. There's so many of these databases now. It is very hard to. The problem too is like if you're very much like if you're dependent on replicache, if something changes with their business or whatever, like you need their business to succeed because if it doesn't, it's gonna kind of suck to migrate. Now, don't have that fully drive your decisions, but I think it's definitely something to keep in mind. And like this just seems like another. It's nice to have the options, but I feel like we're getting to the point where there's a lot of just database services that aren't really offering much difference. It's all just pay us more and we'll make the DX a little bit nicer. Trade-offs potentially worth it, but I think that's what I like specifically about local first is it's more of a paradigm shift as compared to all of these. We're going to just make it easier for somebody on the front end to have a database is what a lot of these feel like. And now with, like you mentioned, the AI, the big AI push, now we just have an additional layer of like, now we support AI and all the vector, et cetera, whatever. Big data is hard. It's nice for somebody to take care of it for you, but also we're like in the JavaScript equivalent of I feel like I'm at database overload. All right, so let's see. We've got a couple other ones in here that I think are interesting to look at. I don't know if these have stores offhand though. So like DXOS, how do we say that? So again, real time local first, great. It looks like they've got a client API. And actually, this is something 2.0. I don't think we've really touched on it yet. Identity and permissions is potentially more involved. And I think that's the harder part that these are starting to solve, which is in some ways you're going to potentially want a centralized identity. So just because I say I don't like the central authority from like an offline perspective, there is potentially still benefit there. So data is so cheap now, a lot of traders would be okay with building a small NAS to store market data. The yeah, I guess that's kind of interesting too. You get the like pro users, which if it's fast, and not just like day traders or whatever. You have like a medical office. They've got potentially a lot of data. You start to get into there's literally regulations that tell them how to store and handle that data. So even if we have a database, they might not actually be even able to use that type of thing. So the offline and local first might just mean in your network. So like functionally, I think it's a really the idea of local first is the use cases enable are really interesting to me. But having that central authority is like we're sort of in that like point where there's like what trade-offs do you want to make? Do you want to have the central authority? And then now what are you getting out of that compared to just like using a database, whatever type of database? Or do you want to go like full local first with all the bells and whistles, all those tenants check boxes? But then identity becomes hard. And then the data ownership, like the user is sort of the one controlling it, which is what if they accidentally delete it? There's no way for them to fix that. I mean, it is literally all trade-offs. Like which for your app, what's going to be the appropriate trade-offs? But okay, so this has got and I guess this starts to pop into a little bit too. So like DX OS, I guess. Okay, so that's an app that they built. What's effect.website? Oh, okay. Effect TS. And socket supply, which I think is that one doesn't work anymore. Yeah, okay. So socket supply is that like native app, but they're this is a table. I was like, why is that weird? It's like a real-time first plus app thing. Yeah, we've looked at that before, or at least I have. I guess mostly offline, but I feel like a lot of those tables for comparing native apps. This actually comes Siddharth. Thanks for stopping by. This sort of comes into your question a little bit. What's the current status of Tauri production readiness? I don't know what's what production readiness is very fungible. There's people that are using it. They have sold. They're running products on it, or they have sold products that are running on it. There's like I know there's like at least one app I think offhand that was a startup that got bought out by Amazon. I don't know. Folks are shipping with it. It is hasn't been around as long as Electron. So in theory, Electron should be more mature. So I don't know. That's a hard question to answer. And like we were looking at the socket supply. I think they said that they just went 1.0 or something. I don't see a and I guess they do say desktop and mobile now. Maybe look at their blog. Their blog. I don't see anything about the major release. Okay, I thought they were going or did go 1.0, but maybe not. And I mean, I guess take with it what you will. They have features that they say that they have and nobody else does. It's kind of hard to read this now, but like Bluetooth native peer-to-peer. I mean, I feel like there's a lot of asterisks that could be in this table. It's just a number though. Like, is this more mature than Tauri or Electron? Like, probably not. But also, you can't just read into the fact that somebody bumped numbers before somebody else did. So, as a noob, we've been building for a bit and it's been nice. Vite, React, and TypeScript, making okay progress. Yeah, there's plenty of people doing toy apps with all of these. And with all of them, you can make a great app, but you can also make an awful app. Electron's gotten a bad rap because I think it has enabled folks to make apps easily. But that means if you can make it easy, it doesn't necessarily mean that the effort was put into it to make it performant. So it's sort of like got a bad rap because it enabled folks to build. So I've got no beef with Electron, and it's been around longer. So if your qualification of production readiness is met by that and not Tauri, then you do you, I guess. But we're going to. So this is my Tauri official. Well, not a like. I'm on the board of Tauri, and I've been. I mean, we've renamed it now, but core working group, whatever you would whatever have you, for many years now. So there's a natural bias for me to say use Tauri, and but like honestly, I'm here to see folks ship, and at least within Tauri, we're gonna keep doing as much as we can to get people to ship, and ship well and performant, and with the appropriate amount of like security considerations, or at least enable it or make it as easy as folks, or as easy as you can to get folks to ship things in a secure way. I assume that's what everybody else is trying to do too. So folks have shipped toy apps, folks have shipped production apps, and all of these. I think it's getting to the point where larger corporations are looking to Tauri as something that they feel that they would be comfortable to build on. It's fun to build Tauri apps. Also, hey Denjel, I think I know what you're talking about. Are you talking about the koi pond? Yes, I was about to say that. Yep. I downloaded it the other day, and I wish it didn't take over the background. That's probably my main thing, but it's kind of fun. So speaking of toy apps, whereas can't put my hand all the way up there, but yes, go check that out if you're interested in the what can we do to play around with side of things. So yeah, anyways, bigger corporations I feel like are starting to actually look at Tauri in a way where it's potentially a choice for shipping something that they're trying to build. And I feel like it was starting. We were starting to get interest in V1 coming into V1. But I feel like now that V2 is like shipped, that conversation has gotten much. That conversation comes up a lot more often. So this is always a question that I see. It's a concern. Again, there's trade-offs and everything. But if you're shipping for the web already, if you're using web tech, if you've used web tech, that's not any different. And honestly, the web views / browsers have come along enough that the differences are pretty minimal. There are still going to be little bugs and whatnot, but like most libraries that you're going to use and pull off the shelf already have polyfills or something built in to deal with that. So unless you're like real bleeding edge, in which case you're still going to potentially have an issue if like Electron is shipping Chrome embedded. If that version of Chrome embedded doesn't support the thing that you want to ship on, then you're out of luck until they update. So yes, it ships a browser. Yes, that can provide some consistency, but I don't think it's as much of a deal as back in the days of like Internet Explorer and Netscape, where you had to have a polyfill to make an app because it was impossible to get everything to even remotely look similar between browsers. You just know that with the push towards Rust, it seems like what you, So Rust, I wouldn't say that using Rust ensures a secure backend, but it is shown to be performant. That memory safety is great to have, and the ecosystem I think is really makes it interesting. So folks that are building crates are building it with the intention that it's being used as like an operating system level thing. So just because we're using Rust doesn't mean your app's going to be secure. But the ecosystem is it's pretty great. So like I said, you can build a bad app in anything. But the all the benefits that come with Rust is I think it really gives it some ups. The tools are right in front of you. Yeah, exactly. Like it feels like the like the things that you want to you don't have to fight the things that you want to pull off the shelf is probably the best way that I could qualify it. Anytime you hear about polyfills, you get scared like there's some mythical, mysterious piece of code. So a polyfill is just it's a bit of code that handles all these like weird edge cases. So yes, back in the day, it was a mythical, mysterious piece of code because they were baking in the code to handle these weird edge cases in all these different browsers. So it was like maybe the highest level version of it, I would say, that is approachable is the normalized.css. I don't think it's needed nearly as much anymore. But like the margins would be different on every browser, or like the background would not be white on some browsers. Like the difference in background color would be, or the background color would be different between browsers. So something like this was in some ways a polyfill to just make all the browsers look the same, at least the first layer of code. So it just had a bunch of body CSS
with flags for specific browsers or hard-coded pieces of CSS to get all the browsers to end up looking the same. So all of the polyfills were like the more like JavaScripty type polyfills that were required back in the day were getting interactions to be specific. So if I interacted with an input, I want that input to feel the same for the user regardless of what browser they're using. If it was different, somebody would figure out some way to like work around it. So polyfill was basically a whole bunch of workarounds compiled into a thing that made that input work the same on every browser, or at least as close as you could come to it. So yes, in some ways it's a mythical, mysterious piece of code, but in function, it's not. Because all it's doing is trying to get the experience to be the same across browsers. So when they really hit their stride and became useful, you're potentially familiar with something like Babel. There was a time period where the specs for browsers was evolving fast, and people wanted to play around with and try these new things, but it would take a while for the browser manufacturers to get that into code. So what Babel was doing was it was taking newer syntax and basically converting it into something that would work on the older syntax. So yes, mythical, mysterious, but in function, all it's doing is saying, well, if you do this thing, I'm instead going to use this code instead. This piece handles Internet Explorer, this piece handles Netscape, this piece handles, Chrome, Safari, etc., etc. So it's kind of just a bunch of fancy if statements. And the mysterious, mythical part of it is just somebody figured out a hack. And now everybody gets to use that hack without having to think about it. And then once the browsers came along, that hack isn't as necessary anymore. Crazy how much has changed since you took C++ in high school. Yeah, honestly, I've been interested in programming for a long time, but I didn't actually get into it until more recently because I wasn't big into the like. I saw the pain that folks were pushing as the righteous way in these lower level languages like C or whatever, where it took a lot of work to get something working and it was painful. And I did not have any interest in that. But then at some point, there was a shift where folks were looking to make the tools better and make the tools, the experience using them better. This is one of the reasons I really enjoy writing Rust. If there's an error message, when you're working on something and you see an error message, if that isn't clear what needs to be changed, like that is effectively, as far as the language is concerned, considered a bug. So that focus on the DX and the compiler actually being something that's useful and helping you, like that's what made me really want to make programming make the switch to programming as a career. So I guess a little bit of background. I was a structural engineer. I was licensed. I made sure buildings and structures stood up. But in all those previous jobs, I've been doing coding of different degrees. The amount of Visual Basic for applications that I wrote for Excel. Yeah. Got stuff done though. It made us money. All right. So catching up on chat here a little bit. So to what extent can Tauri be extended without needing to modify Rust code? This is an interesting question because I think what your intent is here is what kind of app can I make without having to write Rust? In many of the plugins and APIs, you don't need to touch Rust because it does it all for you. Like that plugin is set up to do all the Rust and do everything in Rust, and then it has the client, the web view APIs to then invoke those things. If you're using those plugins and your app is just gluing together a bunch of Tauri plugins plus whatever front end APIs, you probably don't need to just touch Rust at all. If you're doing something that needs native functionality that doesn't have an existing plugin, that's when you start needing to get into Rust. But you still can write it in a way that you can effectively write a plugin with these pieces very much abstracted from your main code base that does the interactions in Rust and provides an API for your web view. So if you're doing this in the context of a team, you might need to potentially dive into Rust depending on what operating system level like APIs you need to use. That doesn't mean everybody on the team needs to know Rust though. Yeah, Darth was saying that you can make plugins for Tauri or just use pure Rust. So that we've done some experiments on stream where we did literally everything that we possibly could, we did in Rust. So there's Rust that you can write, which then it gets compiled to WASM, which then ends up running in the web view. Kangar, yes, this is true, but also I don't even know how to put into words how awful it was to try to make that work without using a polyfill. Like things were just so inconsistent, and it did get better over time. But if you were shipping any sort of app, like if we didn't have polyfills, you would not be able to ship an app, is how it kind of started out as. Like it used to be more where a website was informational, and then there's kind of the spectrum where you have an informational website and you have something that is very much like an application, something that traditionally could have been installed directly in the computer and only be used on a computer, used like from the desktop, not as as a separate entity or a separate thing. So there's that spectrum. Without polyfilling, it would have been very difficult to do anything that was remotely on this side of the spectrum. But it was fine because when it first started out, all the browsers were trying to do was render some structured text in a way that looked decent. And if there weren't that many browser options to start, and then they started to kind of like come onto the scene, and then those differences became more apparent. And some of it was fine because it was kind of just look and feel, and if look was a little bit different, not too big of a deal. But when you started getting, more and more folks trying to do applications in the browser, somebody needed to figure out that polyfill and that mythical magic to make it all work the same. Otherwise, you just wouldn't be able to ship. So, here we're talking about local first stuff right now. It's kind of the same. Linear is pretty well known for their sync engine. Was it Figma did a whole bunch of with the multiplayer. Google Docs with their multiplayer. Somebody had to figure that out. That was not insignificant amount of effort. But you can, depending on what you're doing, you can ship stuff. You don't need that. But if you're really trying to hit on a specific type of app, figuring that out, say Linear did, it's worth that effort. And that's effectively, all of these different things that have been solved over time. That's sort of the basis. Somebody feels there's value in getting it working and figuring it out.
and going through that effort. So yes, it was way more painful, but polyfills made it much less painful, which is why everybody used them. Darth, nice. 3rd generation construction business. Nice. Yeah. I'm I didn't dislike the construction industry per se, but it definitely it didn't suit my direction in life for multiple reasons. Also, I hate cold, which is ironic because I live in a state that's cold in the US. But having to go outside for work was not on my bingo card for many years. Okay. What time we got? We've been going for almost 2 hours. I think we'll probably bounce through these last couple ones because these are the ones that I think there's some interesting ones to get into. And actually, there's one on here that Jazz Tools, I think it is. Yeah, this is another one. Seems pretty interesting. Let's bounce through some of these and see if there's anything that we need to put on our near term to-do list to look at. I'm guessing the setup or the amplified data store is likely just a backend piece. Relational models. Yeah, see, this seems like a lot of the same, where it's you can, I mean, it's kind of just you're working with the client, and then you display it. So fancy version of a database, or GUI over a database again. Are any of these other ones like that? We'll come back to Jazz.tools because I've looked at that a little bit. And no vendor lock-in. That definitely piques my interest. What else do we have? I've heard folks talking about Laurel, but I haven't dug into it too much. It looks very much like these APIs are similar to YGS. Looks like they have a novel CRDT algorithm. And like that's part of the other bit too is the so CRDTs as an ideological thing, folks have settled on the idea of that being beneficial to use for this type of application. But that algorithm and how to do it isn't like standardized. So something can be a CRDT, but you can have CRDTs that work in one fashion or another, depending on whatever algorithm it is, because it's like functionally, it's just trying to determine preserve. So this specifically says preserve full version history like Git. If you're familiar with Git, there's different ways that you can merge data into a branch. So if you create a branch, now you have like 2 sets of data. If there's changes in any of those branches, if you want to start merging things together, you have options on how you do that and how it handles that. From a high level, it doesn't seem like there's much difference to get data from here to here. But like, if you both make the same change, how do you determine like if it's the same change, then maybe it doesn't matter, but maybe that changes happened the same in different spots. Like which one do you take? You don't want to take both because then you're potentially doing a function twice. So which one wins? And that's like that kind of algorithm stuff is a lot of, I think, is what differentiates between these CRDTs. And the algorithm also ends up playing into like the speed of how that happens. So there's some, like if you have a full history and you're dependent on that full history to provide you a final state, that can potentially have an effect on how fast it is to process like new and existing results. So it's the same way with like a database. You dump a whole bunch of information in a database. If you don't have an index on it or a way to like search or deal with that, then you start getting this like, CS term level. Why is this thing suddenly slowing down when it was fine before? So those are the trade-offs that these different, and in part why there's many options, because they're thinking about it and prioritizing these different pieces separately. All right, so this seems very much in the vein of YJS. So we'll set that one aside. I think this, they have a pronunciation here, don't they? Branding. I thought they had something about how do you pronounce this, but I'm not seeing it now. This one. I think it's logx, but I doubt myself. I haven't looked too much at this one. Legend state, super fast, all-in-one state and sync library. I think part of this is built on top of yeah, so this is a service and they've got an open source piece of it. So like this isn't the thing that you pay for here is not the infrastructure. They have a platform, boards, tickets, to do type things. I think this is kind of in the vein of like linear whatever too, but then they've got an open source piece of it. And what is their open legend state 2 performance and persistent? Interesting. All right. Yeah, let's we'll take a closer peek at that. I think this is seems pretty interesting what they're doing here. They've got observables and then they a little bit more lower level observer. Yeah, so like this is a I don't know if fancy is the right word, but in the same vein of like here's a hook to get the state. Get and set. And they have comparisons to like, so React Redux hooks and MobX and Jotai. It's pretty interesting. Geometric mean. So these are, let's see, is this all in milliseconds? Here, duration in milliseconds. So the operations move relatively quick. And the reason this matters is if you think of when you're doing operations local first, you're not doing the situation where you send off an API and like an API request, and it just kind of either will happen synchronously or technically async, but you wait for the change, or you be optimistic about it, where you fire off a change and you just assume that it worked correctly, and then you check in the background to confirm that. That's different if you're doing that work locally, because you tend to want to write that change immediately locally, but you want that to happen fast. So if you're, in the case of like a SQLite database, if you're writing directly to the SQLite database, you want that to happen in the lock to like on that change to go away quick, in a responsive amount of time. So if you think about like video games, like 30 frames a second or 60 frames a second, anything above like 60, then in games you might notice it. On web apps, probably not. So like if you can do operations to where if you're scrolling or if you're firing off an operation, you want to be able to like re-render that page 60 times in a second, which means like 1 divided by 60. Like if you have operations that are taking longer than that, then you need to start thinking about it. So like that's why this matters, because you want that operation to happen quickly enough that the user isn't like waiting on it or feeling it. So once you start getting into like their green coloring and the red coloring, that's sort of the basis for these, where on some of the like create many rows, that is a batch operation. Yes, that number is big, but like the user's expectation of that happening instantaneously is going to be much smaller. But if you're looking at something like a select row, that's probably the biggest one, I would say. A select row, you want that to be fast because you want to be able to click around and see things very quickly. Okay, so this is a very interesting API. Local persistence plugins for browser and React Native, with sync plugins for Keel, Supabase, TanStack, Query, and Fetch. That is interesting. It's got this idea of like a use observable. So this is kind of in the vein of like, I can see why they're comparing it to these options, because in some ways, like using this is going to be, you wouldn't use MobX and this, or you wouldn't use Jotai in this. You're probably going to end up picking one, because it's like the implementation is at that point, and so they're mostly focusing on the if we look here on the syncing data part. If we look at, that was a legend, so you'd see there's a legend state here. We don't have a storage backend for it. So pros and cons again. In some ways, I kind of appreciate that, because that means that where is it? Legend app. This ends up happening where their sync mechanisms and where they're syncing ends up being a little bit more flexible, which I think is nice to see. What's Bravely? They have Legend app and Bravely. Okay, so CRM type thing. All right. What else do we got? We have it seems like they're working on it enough. Like some of these things, sure, if you haven't changed babel.ts in 2 years, they got button here. Interesting. So like it seems like there's activity here, which is nice to see. Some of these others though, this one's I wouldn't write it off. But it's 5 months. You can tell it's not nearly as active as some of the other options. They do have, though, to establish a direct peer-to-peer connection with WebRTC, a signaling channel is needed. I like this. A clandestine courier network. Lets your application users talk directly with one another, encrypted and without a server or middleman. And you can see they can connect over a couple of these different options. I think that's interesting because this starts to get into the how do you deal with permissions? You kind of have to have some encryption like involved in that process. But also if it's secure private peer-to-peer connections, it kind of enables this sort of thing where you have options in how you sync, which is kind of cool. They do have React hooks, which is interesting. So what does this look like? Join room. So some of this looks very much like in the vein of like working with a setup that we had with YJS. So we get some information from peers. And you can sync. I mean, or in this case, it looks like it's only working over WebRTC. So it is definitely, I mean, coming back to this conversation about polyfills, WebRTC in Tauri on Linux there's been a history of issues there. Not necessarily like Tauri specific, but like WebRTC in Linux and Linux web views is like the experience is not nearly as good as it is on or does it exist now? I think maybe some of the web views in Linux have it, but it hasn't always been that way. And that has changed more recently than like Chrome and Safari supporting it. So something to keep in mind. This one does feel very much like it is tied to a room. It's encrypted, and you need to like keep track of that. So that seems neat. And it is very much tied to that room. But like if you compare this to something like YGS where their ecosystem is maybe a little bit further along, I mean they do have options here. Some of these are kind of big. And IPFS it is definitely very much in the vein of like data ownership. I mean, once you start seeing like BitTorrent and like IPFS, it's clear that they're interested in that subset of. Yeah, interesting. They're interested in that subset of, making an app. Yeah, so this is very much like decentralized infrastructure. It all would happen in the web view though. So you wouldn't see any specific benefit about putting this in a Tauri app other than you could potentially do like what we did on the YGS with a server stream, like 4 weeks ago or something now. I don't remember. It's been a hot minute, but check that one out if you're interested in it. We ran a WebRTC signaling server for YGS in the REST side of our Tauri app. And that meant that like any device on the network could then connect to that effectively that Tauri app. We could do the same here. But there's no option to have centralized authority, which is I forgot about that. It still works. Hey John, good to see you. It's been a hot minute. I appreciate what they're doing here with the peer-to-peer, but there's like no central authority, or they don't make it easy to just build into central authority, which is potentially downside for what, depending on what you're trying to build here. Offers multiple serverless strategies for connecting to peers. Yep. What's the session description protocol? So I think this is very interesting, but if I want to do something like this, I guess it does say, did it say encrypted somewhere? Secure private peer-to-peer connections. Does it actually do any encryption though? Session data encryption. I mean, so like, if you would say, I want to use this versus YJS, functionally, it doesn't feel like there's that much of a difference. Except YJS has a little bit more of the ability to also sync it to a central authority. So that flexibility, I think, is really interesting. Definitely, though, don't write this off. All right. Next. And that one may be a little bit less active than some of the alternatives, but not everything can see a whole ton of attention. All right. Biscuits.club apps. I feel like I've looked at these. Yeah. Okay. I've looked at Noki before. It seems pretty interesting. I've not actually. Oh. I'm gonna keep this open for later. Like I appreciate what they're doing with these. So even if I'm not entirely sold on using the framework that they also are doing in concert with that work, doesn't mean that these apps aren't cool. So that is for later me. Verdant gives you access to this new way, blah, blah, blah. This seems like very much a selling you on local first. Here. So Verdant Web. The fact that they say Verdant Web makes me wonder if there's potentially a server involved, but generate a client, store local data. Here, server, sync with the server. So this one does seem to have some expectation of server. Doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing, because if we're considering in the context of a Tauri app, there is server-like things there. So you define a collection which like functions as your schema, and then you generate a client that matches up with that. So you're sort of still kind of locked into, I want to interact with this thing, but I have to, or effectively like fancy GUI over the top of a database. Hey Bastian, good to see you. Thanks for stepping by again. So like fancy database is fine. And servers. So it looks like there's expecting a TypeScript server, or well, a server that you write in Node. I do need to my music ended. Okay. Are you playing? Yes. I used to pipe the music through to the stream, but even though there's no actual copyright issues with the music I was playing, the copyright spam is ridiculous, and every video or anything I posted, I would get a copyright claim on, even though it was valid or it was not valid. But I had to challenge every one of those, so I gave up. And folks were like, I kind of want to just like listen to you talk, blather on for me in my ears, and don't include any music, because sometimes my blathering is drowned out by the music. So I've obliged. You can listen to your own music, I guess, if that's something you're interested in. Let me know what the background music for me is on your end. Speaking of local first background music. Okay, so database SQLite seems interesting. I don't know that any of this specifically interests me though, because fancy GUI over database. Sure, we've got lots of options to do that. It handles all the store. Doesn't appear to be too much with flexibility there, and then we would have to have a Node backend, which I mean maybe you could do with like database file. I mean, is that like a durable objects Cloudflare type setup? Could be kind of cool. But like nothing specifically interesting for use within Tauri. And like the fact that it syncs to a SQLite database is not terribly unique either. So they're shipping with it. Don't write it off. I don't know that it's something that I'm going to jump on implementing in any of my projects though. Personal web app. Yeah. So you want to? Oh, they use fly.io. I wonder if it uses the what was it, the I'm blanking. Fly.io had a like SQLite thing. I think they've sunset it though, so which is a little bit unfortunate. It seems like Cloudflare is the only real option if you want to do like everybody gets their own SQLite database, but still is able to sync to and from it. Seems like it's sort of the only option at the moment. Yeah, I'm appreciate what they're doing here. Not something though that I feel like I could immediately jump into, and nice. Yeah, like I can't mathematically guarantee consistency. Give it a shot. Honestly, completely fair. I'm like that. Yeah. But it has all the downsides and no unique upsides compared to other options would probably be how I would qualify it for our again, like we're kind of, at least me personally, we're going over everything just for everybody's benefit, but also I have personal interest in diving into some more of these. and it doesn't really check any of those personal interest type of boxes. All right, so we got a couple left. We looked at this one a little bit. This one again is kind of the same thing. It's expecting you to like use their story essentially. The reason, so maybe a little bit of background would be beneficial. The few things that I've been interested, some of which I've been interested for quite a while in building and developing with this like ideological architecture. One of the big pieces that I end up continuing to come back is like derived data. So one of the things, I guess we can take a bit of a side digression here. I've been working on this app for, I don't know, for quite a while. The idea is that you add in a bunch of entries and we can derive a lot of information and a lot of data off of that. If I don't have control over the store, I mean, I've refactored this a few times now. If I don't have control over that store, that we run into issues with that data derivation. So it controlling the store, like the framework they're using, controlling the store is not bad inherently. But for the use case that I'm interested in, it seems like controlling the store is going to, like me being able to control the store when I'm writing my code can provide benefits. But that also means that we end up having to potentially get more low level because all of the DX gains by all of these libraries seem to be coming from the fact that they're controlling the store and they control the front end store, that client, which then does the sync to whatever peer-to-peer WebRTC or the like centralized server. You know, it's doing some sort of syncing somehow. So that's kind of the lens that I've been like looking at these through. What are we getting to? A little bit over 2 hours. Just double checking to make sure I don't have anything that's pressing. I think we can finish up a little bit here. We'll probably go through the last couple of these, and that's likely where we will end up calling it. And many of these we haven't dug into more deeply on stream because, again, so here, let's switch over to JavaScript, I guess. You're writing SQL, and then you're, update UI. So listens for changes to local data store. This one maybe is a little bit more interesting because it is a little bit more low level and it does have a Rust piece to it. And I guess what's specifically interesting about that is we could handle all the syncing in Rust in the context of a Tauri app. So the Tauri app handles the syncing, and then the basically the web view ends up just being a view of that. So it's sort of like a query from the web view to the Rust side of things to get the data. Now you do have to consider like there's that potentially serialization between those endpoints, or like over those APIs. So things to think about still there. But if you got multiple windows, you start having to consider that because if you have window A and window B, if you make a change in window A, you also want window B to reflect that. If each one of these windows is doing its own sync, now you're basically like you need the local sync because you're basically trying to get these browser tabs to communicate to each other. One of the ways you can do that is moving your data and the data ownership like further up the stack into the Rust side of things. to where your Rust is the thing that's doing the queries or syncing, and then all of the web views are just working off that like shared store. So this is potentially kind of interesting because you can have this could all be done in Rust, and then you wouldn't need to do this in JavaScript because you're going to basically just be querying for the data through a command or something. So the data derivation, if you're deriving data or you're doing something with the data, you could do that all in Rust, which would be fast. But what you're doing with it and the amount of data that you're pushing to the front end of Vue could start to potentially cause issues, and you'd have to think about that. But it would mean that you're not purely I guess at that point then your the front end is just a view layer. You're not doing anything. The web view is not actually doing the thing which handles data derivation. All that being said, though, you kind of have to use an app now. It's doing something like that is probably going to mean that you aren't going to publish a web app unless you're doing maybe you could data store. You could maybe bundle this as WASM or something, or maybe you'd have to write this into a worker for web app. This is pretty interesting, though. Honestly, I'm finding that just the fact that they have SDKs for Rust ends up being kind of an interesting bit. So we look at logX and it's got a hook. We're looking at data. There's a client. It basically just has a sync mechanism built into it, and then you need a server. So something needs to do this. If our only option is to do that as a node service, or throwing it in like a worker or something, maybe. Then your Tauri app implementation would just be, it wouldn't be any different than a web app. So benefits. Coinbase started to update their API examples to include a Rust example. I feel like Rust is starting to hit the zeitgeist, as it were, where these companies that have some sort of data or whatever, infrastructure or whatever, and they have SDKs. All of these used to have Node because there was so many people writing Node, because the audience crossover, the audience that they were hitting on, were front end folks. They didn't want to set up their own infrastructure. That's why they're using this service. I feel like Rust is starting to get into that now, where I don't know if it's folks writing front end Rust. What's the use case for that? So Rust servers, sure. I guess it's maybe a lot of Rust servers. Yeah, to be clear, I'm not saying it doesn't work. I'm just it's interesting that we're seeing more Rust SDKs for all of these sort of API level, save you from making the client sort of setups. What is so this seems to require a real-time updates offline first. It works with any database and in any cloud. Optional end-to-end encryption. So that's like, I've seen a couple of these where they say, um, they say like a secure protocol. I think it just means that like you're sending it over HTTPS. But this is actually, is that, I think that's actually saying that the data is encrypted over the wire. TradingView basically uses React and their backends. Yeah, it seems like that's starting to become the use cases where folks are running into um, the, like if you weren't deploying Node, it seemed like Java has been the default for a while. It feels like more and more folks are starting to switch to using something like Hill or Rust to do the backend stuff, like be that like backend API server, which is kind of cool. I guess that's probably the most of the use case. API server written in Rust. Um, so what is this? I mean, it says that it's the optional end-to-end encryption is neat. CRDT and an optimistic UI. I don't want to write this one off for at least the use case that I'm specifically interested in, but task client. I think I would have to look at it more closely because it does have some like auth is not easy. So if you use something like YJS, like the setup we were doing with YJS and our like WebRTC signaling server, there was basically no auth over it, which in a subset of apps could be fine. But I don't know. It's hard. I think it would be hard to convince folks that no user permissions or authentication is the way to go. I think people want to, if they're finding value in it and they want it syncing between many devices, I think having the like user login behind it, it's going to be hard to convince folks to go in a different direction with that, or use something. You know, it's like selling on the value of passwords or passphrases or whatever new. You know, like we're not going to get away from having the account yet. It's got some interesting bets. I don't think so. Like potentially, you know, using their server would not be entirely token. Like this might be fun to just go through the tutorial. I don't know if this is something though that we would necessarily do on stream because it is like I don't see anything Rust related here. Guess we can double check if they have like a Rust implementation. Yeah, Redux compatible API. Create store. So that must be, yeah, that must be piping into like the Emmer data store or something. Interesting. It has some interesting bits here. I think I'll probably put a pin in this one and maybe we come back to it later. So yeah, this is interesting. Right now the biometric plugin only works for mobile, I believe, right? There are downsides with that. the classic movie, you get killed and they just use your thumb, or the less morbid version of that, your kid just brings the phone over to you when you're taking a nap on the couch. So there's downsides and everything. Um, but like some mechanism of auth, I think is going to be always, at least for the near future, it's going to need to exist. So even if you're doing local first, if you're doing local first peer to peer, you're probably still going to want some authentication user thing tied there. Because you don't want somebody just coming to your house and all of a sudden starting to like sync your data. So there's gonna need to be something there. And I think initially folks didn't start off like looking at that or thinking about that, but yeah, this is actually another one that they were on the local first podcast that Johannes does. And I think the thing that really stood out to me was like a lot of these pieces are very much familiar. You have potentially seen these bits in other implementations of local first CRDT, whatever. But the thing that is really interesting is that it sort of has these like an idea of an account and a group built into it, and you can they've solved that part. It seems pretty well solved, or at least enough that you could use it to where you still get these other bits, but then all the auth and encryption is built on top of it too. Yeah. So there is some. I'm not gonna like write it off. So just the fact that they have a React hook, they do actually say Vue as well, which is kind of cool. So like they're thinking about other implementations. Define component here. Use so a little bit hooky still. But they are thinking about different implementations, and then they gotta use a computed property, but it doesn't look like they're actually doing much with it other than pulling it out. So I think that's probably the thing that, like everything else I've seen with this, you're still like building it up with their infrastructure. I don't think any of that is inherently like open source. You effectively are going to be using their stuff, their infrastructure. But that being said, if they're doing all of the sync and storage, yeah. So like the fact that they solved this bit first, I think, is the role-based permissions and being able to handle all of that built into it. That's probably the most unique thing about it, is in my mind, is how I would qualify it. And honestly, that would probably be the thing that would convince me the most to look more closely at it. If they're thinking about that already, that I feel like says something. Because then we move past this is a neat research project to like people are trying to ship off of this. They need to have some sort of functionality like this, and tying it to the data and encrypting it with that. I feel like it checks a lot of those boxes that would keep me interested. And we're getting to the end of our options here. I guess we looked at legend. So this is another one, also SQLite. Does specifically say end-to-end encrypted sync. I don't know what this type safe SQL query builder. Okay, so basically they're using our framework to make the client. Not saying that's a bad thing, but like that also means that you're probably using their hooks. So functionally, like SQLite support in the browser seems like some sync mechanism. That like this is the only bit that no vendor lock-in. What does that mean? Oh, local only tables. That's kind of a neat. They are thinking about other integrations. So they say solid view svelte soon. But that also means that like it's not like the DX that they're building into it is like done through that hook. So if the hook and the client are the thing that's making the DX nice, that means that it ends up getting tied specifically to, like in this case, React. They do have like a common piece though, so like the abstractions are there, but they're controlling the state. I can't imagine there's too much as far as like derivation of state. I don't see though like how do you do the sync? Database type. So they must just like sync to a. So the hard part is to both solve the local first. I want to work with this offline, but also do the like peer-to-peer or central authority sync. Checking all of those boxes is both difficult and a lot of work. Um, yeah, okay. So this server provides sync and backup for clients. Hmm. Yeah, and like this is a good thing to call out. Being able to do both though is really nice. So they have like a an example. It doesn't seem like yeah. So it's all very much like Node, and you need to. It's like the open source version of Electric SQL or something, I guess maybe. So that would probably be the no vendor lock-in. You're not specifically tied to something that you would have to pay for, but then the trade-offs. If you're not paying for it, if you're not paying money for it, then you're potentially paying time for it. So what's the trade-off you want to make? Here, let's do this real quick. Next graph. So it's got a couple different like we sync based off of create and modify structured data. So it seems like they might be building on top of YJS and auto merge maybe. This does seem like a little bit more Kitty's saying hi in a awkward way. So it seems like it's a little bit more like researchy. By definition, NextGraph is self-hosted. It seems interesting, but I don't know this. Okay. Safe Rust bindings for LMDB with encryption at rest. NextGraph RS. Curious. I do see a bunch of like ng app. It's not quite clear what's going on here. So like, what are they? Is this like a? So I see as soon as I see wallet or app, I'm presuming that it's built on top of like quote unquote Web3 type things. Yeah, so they have some app and then you got to create a wallet. If that's ever going to come along to where it's usable by the folk that aren't looking at this in their daily lives, I think it's got some time to evolve. I think we'll leave it at that. So then I guess the last one here is Laurel or Laurel. This one does feel like it might have some similarities to what YJS is doing, with potentially a different CRDT algorithm that may or may not matter depending on what you're doing. So like the difference in CRDT algorithms could make a difference if you've got like lots of users editing a thing. So that sync order and whatnot could potentially have an effect. But if like you're mostly just using this as a way to like sync my phone to my computer, which algorithm you use probably isn't going to make a huge difference, honestly. At this point, I imagine that they've come along a ways enough that it's going to matter less. They do have a Rust implementation though, which seems interesting. Time travel functionality is already accessible, so it seems like it's a little bit on the newer side of things. And it doesn't seem like it's specifically server. So what would be interesting about that is you could do sync in Rust, and then you could basically just have the web view be the actual like view. It looks like there might be some cursor time travel. There might be some little bits of how these pieces are implemented that might differentiate it from YJS. But it seems I'm getting similar vibes. I would presume that there's some reason that they're working on this relative to, here we go. Okay. Event graph walker. So this is probably part of it. I'm not specifically keen on the use case of text collab. This, I think I've actually seen this before. Check that out if you have not seen that before. Text can get really complex, so like that is probably where the CRD text. So tree is like structured data. And the list and movable list. Yeah, okay. So this would be more like if you have varied, like YJS, I think was built with the purpose of like peer-to-peer, well, not peer-to-peer, I shouldn't say peer-to-peer, built with like multiplayer text editing in mind. So a lot of their work is around that kind of thing, and that type of interaction to where you're just like editing pieces of data. But once you start getting like the if you have a list of data and you're doing CRDT algorithm type things on those pieces of data, it's not too big of a deal. But once you start like nesting and having relational type data, moves become complex, because if somebody deletes something from the list, and then you move the list, how do you like what's the how do you determine which to keep, or both, or what? So it seems like that's something that they're trying to solve here. So it's potentially going to be a big benefit to look into. And it looks like it's there's a lot of rust here. Fast time travel through history. So like it's got some things going for it. So I can see the use case. It feels like it was built with these expectation that it feels similar to YJS, but it's got stuff that YJS doesn't. So you may find that beneficial or not. You cannot use it in Rust, JS, via WASM, and Swift. So that's definitely interesting. Yeah, we have incorporated a similar algorithm for effectively merging collaborative editing operations. Yep. This seems real. This seems pretty neat. It doesn't seem like it's a huge team, but it doesn't have the. I think we'd have to look more specifically at the peer-to-peer bit and like how it's doing syncing. But this is something that would potentially be worth digging into. Where's that? Here, docs. Cursor export mode. So this seems very much built around the Laurel Excalibur. This feels like it's very much built around the Rust create Swift package. So how do you sync? That's the main question that I care about right now. Save load, Laurel doc, sync here. Okay, so this is very much like feels like YJS, where this library specifically is solving the once the data arrives, how do we make sure that it matches and we can like sync up the state, not the actual like I need something served like the infrastructure bits that actually do the serving of it, which I suspect that would happen in time. Let's double check. Yeah, so I think that would be the bit that figuring out we'd have to figure out how to dig into that a little bit. Okay. I think it's probably a good place to stop. We've done a bunch, and I mean we're almost at 3 hours already. I think we have some interesting things to dig into. There's a bunch of these that are like, I appreciate what they're doing here with the encryption and that. So I think that probably would be the bits that would be worth digging in further. If we're going to like as a generic topic continue down, like part 2 of this stream. I think the thing that we would look at would be what does the sync mechanisms look like? What are our options for that? Because those are the bits that I think might be interesting with Tauri specifically. If we set up a Tauri app that could potentially serve as some like low level infrastructure. So like you could have a server living somewhere, and then you could do something like edge workers or whatever serverless function thing, which is a little bit closer to the people that are using it. Like your Tauri app could be the edgiest of edge servers and do like a peer-to-peer like local sync. So it could be a sync that happens purely within an internal network. Hi, Kitty's coming to say hi and call us out, or not call us out, finish this out here. So I think that's what we would dig into more. And it seems like we have a few places to look at, but they all seem to be WebRTC, signaling server, or a central thing. Those are pretty much our options right now. Yeah. I think that's probably where we'd end up going with it. The bye. Okay. Some type of server that could either be hosted centralized or like edge server, serverless type thing, or something we could run in a like the back end of a Tauri app. I think those would be the interesting integrations, but that kind of means that at least to make it simple and or demoable on stream, it's probably going to need to be in Rust. Honestly, a little partial to that anyways. But I think that'll end up eliminating some of these, even though they seem interesting, and we'll keep an eye on them for potential other use cases. But for stream content and what I'm personally interested in digging into, I suspect we are potentially in a short list of. I mean, the jazz.tools is neat because it solves the auth piece of it, but also there's no. You have to use their infrastructure basically. I guess maybe like Laurel was the one that just went 1.0. I think that was the one that I noticed. I think maybe playing around with Laurel would be kind of fun. It feels in the same vein of YJS, and we've had some interesting integrations there. So I suspect that there might be some bits that would be cool to explore there. And like it seems flexible enough where we could do like doesn't have to control all of the state. We can do some like level of derived data there. Yeah. So Laurel might be high on the list. Laurel and I guess there's a bunch of other database options that we didn't really look at. We didn't look at any of the actual databases or the storing data, but many of those are very much. The ones that we did look at are it's basically supporting in like a paid for infrastructure. So there's some that are a little bit more flexible where you'd be able to control the state on the front end yourself. And there's some that are expecting to sort of control that whole stack. So benefits and, or, pros and cons in either direction there. I think Loro and that's probably the big one. Or that Legend State was kind of neat too. Was that the other one that did Auth? Yeah, okay, so Legend State was very much the front end one. So it seems like, yeah, okay, and Legend State had the sync mechanism in it. So I guess maybe the high level thing is the ones that seem interesting to integrate within a Tauri app specifically are ones that don't have the full stack under control, which is a downside for good DX, because them controlling the whole stack means they can provide a good DX potentially. But the upside is more control, I guess. Cat crazies. All right, I think that's what we're gonna call it today. For sure, I think it was in 2 weeks we're gonna do Android on Tauri V2. If that's something that is going to be of interest to you, hit the subscribe button and notification and hop in that stream. And next week we might do we're either going to look at more of this local first server stuff, or there is a new web API to do like local file storage stuff. Face plans, subscribe button, nice. So we're either going to play around with like the file system APIs within the use case of Tauri, or we're gonna do more with these CRDT server peer-to-peer sync stuff. All of that's eventually gonna happen, but next week maybe we do the file system stuff. That feels like a good thing. File system stuff, Android the following week, and then I guess it's the holidays. Oof. All right. Have a great rest of the week, y'all. See you next time. Next Tuesday. Bye.